I've been pissing in the wind. I chanced a foolish grin and dribbled on my chin. Now the ground shifts beneath my feet. The faces that I greet.
Speaking of height, that's a very generous comment from Simon there in the news bulletin. It's actually 1.33 million listeners that we've now recorded on this programme. We tend to round down if it's less than a half and round up if it's over a half. So many thanks to everybody for that. And I'm going to take that, if I may, as a justification, perhaps, for returning to the territory that is probably most responsible for turning this radio programme into one that, for example, is now considerably more popular in London than Radio 4, the BBC's flagship speech programme. And that is, of course, our Brexit coverage. The fact that we found the wherewithal and perhaps the wit to swim against the tide of most of the country's coverage, certainly almost all newspapers and almost all commercial broadcasters, and God bless the BBC and all who sail in her, but their ludicrous attempts to be equivalent and balanced when discussing issues as complicated as questioning whether or not it's raining outside or not meant that we became something of an outpost. We became something of a sort of refuge, I suppose, a safe space, if you like, for fact-based, evidence-based analysis of what had become an incredibly emotional and rhetorical debate. And I know that, with the exception of, people who spend their lives pretending that being compared to a pork product is somehow racist, with that exception, I know that a lot of people who thought Brexit was a good idea continue to listen to the programme. But I also know that for a while now, you probably haven't felt very compelled or keen to call in on those issues, and that's fine. I get that, and I do my best to be nice, although obviously there's always going to be a slight element of resentment at some of the real nastiness and negativity that your fellow travellers, not you, but your fellow travellers, sent in the direction of people like me, both publicly and privately. So that's why contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned remains my mantra. And it's also why perhaps I've gone against my own instincts on occasion and not talked about it, not talked about these consequences. There's a question of fatigue that kicks in. And there's also, don't laugh, this is why I'm using today's listening figures as a springboard into a conversation about the subject. It's quite lonely, you know? It's quite a lonely business, being the little boy in the crowd shouting that the emperor's naked when much bigger, much more powerful figures around you in the same industry are swearing blind that the emperor is not only fully clothed, but that you are some sort of emperor-hating loser, traitor even, and, an enemy of the people or whatever it may be. So the battle is lost. The war is lost. But the truth, of course, is not negotiable. Forecasts are, the Office of Budget Responsibility forecasts today that Brexit will be twice as bad, which, I would say errs on the generous side, twice as bad for the UK economy. The impact of Brexit on the UK economy will be worse than that caused by the pandemic. It will be a hit of about 4% on the long-term GDP, as opposed to the 2% that is forecast for the pandemic results. And I mention this today because the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, is I suppose we'd call it a watchdog, whose forecasts form the basis for the entire budget. So today, and I really hope I can get this across properly, today is not a day where you can say, up the government, up the vote leave government, these forecasts are rubbish, they're all Project Fear, because you can't have it both ways. Either the entire budget is built upon forecasts conducted by a body that you don't trust, in which case we probably shouldn't be talking about the budget at all, or the entire budget is built upon the best available forecasts that the government can use, in which case the fact that the same body is explaining why Brexit is going to be twice as bad for the UK economy than the pandemic, and I would add that, in my opinion, that's probably a best case scenario, that becomes, it's really silly. It turns you into a mug if you're going to pretend that the OBR is not to be trusted while cheering on Rishi Sunak or analysing the budget or taking the predictions in good faith, and then you sort of turn off that good faith from the same institution when you turn your attention to a subject that you're less comfortable with. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. The question that we're left with then is, what do we do together? I mean, I'd like to talk about the country as a whole. What do we do in the country? But I can't. I can only talk about what do we do on this programme. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by problems that the wider media faces, is that I don't get to speak to people like Rishi Sunak for a variety of reasons, and that's absolutely fine. You know, it's the way the cookie crumbles. But other people do, including the Today programme on Radio 4 this morning, which did actually ask this question: do you agree with the Office of Budget Responsibility that Brexit is doing twice as much damage to the economy as the pandemic? Now, I stress again, this is the body that provides the forecasts upon which pretty much the entire budget is built. And Rishi Sunak responds by saying, we've had these debates 5 years ago. That's Banana Republic territory. That's, don't look over here, look over there. That's look into my eyes, look into my eyes. That's absolute madness. And yet it's now so normal in our country, so normal in our government, that it almost goes unremarked. The presenter responded, we're talking about growth now. And he said, well, that's their view. So his entire budget is built on their view. Do you see what I mean? Am I expressing this correctly? Do you understand my frustration and my fear this morning? Is that this man, who in some quarters is being hailed as a sort of a fiscal genius, is dismissing the predictions and the forecasts of the body upon which he has based his entire budget, because the forecasts that they're making about a thing he supported are incredibly negative. And I mean, just to give you some examples, guess who wrote this in the run-up to the referendum? Outside the customs union, shoppers could buy the cheapest products available, saving us all real money. Which fiscal genius do you think wrote that under the Vote Leave banner in the run-up to the 2016? Go on, take a guess. I'll give you a clue. His first name rhymes with dishy. No, it's not a little fishy. Well, it is a little fishy, but his name is Rishi. Rishi Sunak wrote that. He also wrote, according to some, and this was the Project Fear sneer, according to some, leaving the customs union could see EU-bound exports backed up for weeks. Well, I'm very glad we haven't seen any shortages in our supply chain or disruptions to the importation of goods, aren't you? That's why, you know, all the shelves are full, everything's going swimmingly. It's part of the reason. And that's the bit that, and I don't use the fear very often, the word fear very often, but that is the madness that we're in. Okay, so this man, Rishi Sunak, is today touring the studios, doing a lap of honour, if you like, for a budget that is arguably the most left-wing we've seen since Gordon Brown was Chancellor of the Exchequer. But obviously, if you're in the right-wing media, then you go, ha-ha, he's stolen your clothes. Ha-ha-ha, he's stolen your clothes. You don't mention the fact that you've spent your entire career describing those clothes as awful. You just, because everything is a football game now, you just go, ha-ha, ha-ha, lefties. Rishi Sunak has stolen all your policies. Please don't mention the fact that I have been condemning and deriding those policies for my entire journalistic and political career, close brackets. So you've got this fella now touring the studios, doing a sort of lap of honour, and completely dismissing the independent body whose forecasts he relies upon for doing his sums, stating that the thing he voted for, supported, and in many ways was propelled into Downing Street on the back of, is going to do twice as much damage in the long term to the UK economy than the actual pandemic. I shall say that again. The thing that he supported, voted for, and got propelled into Downing Street on the back of is, according to the people who do the sums his entire budget is based on, going to do twice as much damage to the UK economy as the actual pandemic. I mean, and there's more, as the great Jimmy Cricket used to say. The watchdog also says that both import and export intensity had been reduced by Brexit. We know that. What you may not know is that the full picture hasn't even been painted yet. The full post-Brexit checks haven't even been imposed. So the full impact of this referendum decision hasn't even landed. And the Tony Blair Institute claimed in its analysis that without the Brexit shock, most of that past year's £40 billion tax raid would have been unnecessary. And here's the point, politically, that Keir Starmer either won't or can't make. you can criticise, and people will criticise Rishi Sunak for raising taxes. I certainly won't. But people who are supposed to be of a similar stripe to him will be unhappy. I imagine if you open the Daily Telegraph, there'll be someone whining about tax rises. Open the Spectator, there'll be someone whining about tax raises and Muslims. Open the Sun, there'll be somebody whining about tax raises and immigrants. Or footballers kneeling or not kneeling, or whatever the story might be, John Lewis adverts. But the bottom line is this. If you don't like tax rises and you think you're right-wing, you rendered them necessary by supporting Brexit in 2016. The £40 billion estimated tax rate would not have been necessary, according to expert analysis. And remember what happened last time you ignored expert analysis from people you didn't like? Yeah. You ended up putting Boris Johnson in charge of our COVID response plan. How's that working out for you, by the way? So it wouldn't have been necessary. This is what a hit to our economy means. This is what a hit to GDP means. 2% hit, 4% hit. COVID 2%, Brexit 4%. Decline. That's what it means. It means that we as a country become less wealthy and the government has less money to spend, which means they have to take the money from what we earn in the form of taxes. It is, I hope now clear, why not talking about this is diabolically stupid. But we still can't, can we? You might still be listening to this thing, oh, James, shut up. Stop rubbing my face in what I did. I didn't know. I wish I'd listened to you instead of listening to him or her or them. I wish I'd listened to, I don't know, every Prime Minister we've ever had and the Governor of the Bank of England instead of Nigel Farage and Digby Jones. I don't know what happened to me, James, but please stop talking about it. And because I'm quite a nice person, I kind of like not talking. I kind of acknowledge sometimes, some mornings, it's not fair. Don't do any I told you so. I haven't done that for ages, never will. Or at least I will always endeavour not to. Content for the con men, compassion for the conned. But you've got to admit that you were conned at some point. Otherwise, we're just going to look the other way. An entire budget built upon fixing the damage done by the pandemic, right? Bouncing back. Build back better. Without acknowledging that Brexit is twice as bad as the thing we're building back from. How's that working? How does that even work? So 10:15 is the time. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? How would you like to see the impacts and consequences of Brexit reported? And I really hope you'll ring me if you voted for it. Because if you want to say to me, I don't want to see it, I respect your position. I think it's ridiculous in many ways, but I can still respect it. I can understand it. You know, it's not like Jacob Rees-Mogg sitting on the front bench of the House of Commons yesterday not wearing a mask. I can't understand that. But if you don't want to talk about it, I'd love you to justify it to me. So how do you think we, meaning the media as a whole, but little old me in the first instance, you and me, the time we spend together, we're not going to do it every day. We're not going to go back to taking call after call after call from people who've been criminally and horribly misled by some of the most deceitful and disingenuous figures ever to draw breath in public life in this country. None of whom, by the way, will feel the consequences of what they've inflicted on the rest of us. Not really. Andrew Neil lives in the south of France. So how are we going to do it? You tell me. 0345 6060 973. Just tell me. How do you personally, and of course you can ring me up and tell me to fill my boots as well, but that's why today's listening figures are relevant to this conversation. Our judgment obviously is we're getting something right, aren't we, with these sort of figures of people tuning in. But I can't do it every day. How do you want it to be reported? And remember, we are talking to each other on a day when the Chancellor of the Exchequer is trumpeting a budget designed to build back upon the damage done by the pandemic without mentioning that the damage done by the pandemic is adjudged to be roughly half of the damage done by Brexit, according to the same body. That's insane, right? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. I'll take your call wherever you're coming from. But the question is pretty specific. How do you think Brexit consequences should be reported? Because from where I'm sitting today and where 1.33 million of you a week are sitting today, we're pretty much the only people telling you the score. Everyone else is either denying it, lying about it, or looking the other way. What are we going to do? The other bit of the question this morning is, and I think, you know, if you're feeling generally quite at one with the universe, however frustrated and you may be with the direction of traffic and disgusted you are that the people who sold you this pup are still in charge, or saddened perhaps, should we just ignore it? Would that be better for everybody? Genuine question. You know, there's no pleasure in being right when you can't make any difference to anything, or there's no reverse gear. So Brexit is, by the best available measure, going to be twice as bad for the economy even than the pandemic. What's the point of talking about it? We're not going to rejoin the European Union. Shall I just ignore it? Shall I join pretty much everybody else in the media and either ignore it or start sort of pulling the wool over your eyes? Maybe I'll talk about lorry driver shortages in California as a way of proving that Brexit is brilliant. All right, I couldn't quite pull that off. But it's a genuine question. Do you think we should all just ignore it and get on with the business of being as good as we can be, despite the fact that we voted in 2016 to tie our hands behind our back? And we're playing handball. I don't know. 10:23. Jim's in Edinburgh. Jim, what do you reckon?
I reckon it's time that somebody took a forensic look at the whole thing about Brexit, right, and the budget and everything else, and worked out what the negative effects of Brexit have been and what few positive effects there have been. Let's do it in numbers. I'm sure we have people that are numerate enough to be able to do that.
Yeah, we do. I mean, the OBR have kind of done it today, but obviously no one's talking about the Brexit bit of it and everyone's talking about the pandemic bit of it, which leaves us in this surreal situation where the Chancellor is talking about a budget designed to build a recovery from the pandemic while not mentioning that he personally voted for the thing that the OBR considers to be twice as bad as the pandemic. I can't get past that, Jim. Every time I say it out loud, I think I must have made a mistake because it sounds so nuts. But what's the point, Jim? And I don't know how much you've listened to this show, so if, you know that I don't need much encouraging to point out the disbenefits of Brexit. But what is the point? If I sat here now for the rest of my career going, oh, look, and that's happened now, and that's happened now, and that's happened now, and the OBR says 4%, and that's happened now, what's the point? What does it achieve?
Well, the point is that when people go to the shops and they don't find the things that they want, and they find that some things have gone up in price, they should know exactly where to put the blame.
Why?
Because
if they voted for it, they have to blame themselves. No one's going to want to do that.
That's right. Well, sometimes you make a mistake and you just have to admit it.
But you don't, do you? Not in this country. In this country, you don't have to admit it. You get promoted for making mistakes in this country. If the cabinet and the government is anything to go by, you actually get promoted.
Well, you just get shuffled around. If you make a mess of something, you just get shuffled to another
Boris
job.
Johnson sold the country Brexit, and he ended up Prime Minister on the back of it, mate. You don't have to admit you've made a mistake. He was claiming that our test and trace system was world-beating 10 minutes ago. Yesterday, his own Parliament Select Committee found it to be an eye-watering waste of money. What's the point in detailing the reality of something that the people in charge and most of the right-wing media is going to continue to deny? What's the point? What does it achieve? It just makes us all sad.
Well, Boris Johnson's just an opportunist. He used to be in favour of Europe. He just switches back and forward according to where the main chance is.
I know this, you know this, but what's the point of pointing it out now?
Well, maybe people learn as they go. We don't always get things right.
Okay, so even if you look at the polling now, huge majorities for people think, A, it's going badly, and B, it was probably a mistake in the first place, bigger for the first than the second. We can't rejoin. Well, what is the point? What is the banner around, the standard around which we're supposed to gather, Jim?
Well, we can rejoin. I mean, the SNP, whom I do not support, they would rejoin.
Yes, okay. You remind me once again that, of course, north of the border, the picture is a little different and the stakes are a little, if not higher, then again, a little different from how they are down here. 26 minutes after 10 is the time. And I don't really do what's the point questions, but seriously, what's the point? If the Chancellor of the Exchequer is pretending that it's not happening on the day that he's touring the studios, talking about his budget, and most people are letting him, just pretending it's not there. There is no elephant in the room. What's the point of dedicating time and energy to describing the elephant if the people in charge are denying that it exists or just pretending it's not there? And the answer to this question a while ago, when there was still a chance of a second referendum, was pretty simple. If you let these liars and cheats get away with this, God knows what they'll end up in charge of next. But they were in charge of one of the worst responses to the global pandemic in the world. It can't be any worse than that. We've already had the worst case scenario of letting them get away with the last disaster. They were in charge for the current disaster. What's the point? What is the point? Carl's in Norwich. Carl, what do you reckon?
I think it's time we started talking about healing and moving forward together as a country. Really, we all accept.
You've got to acknowledge the wounds first, haven't you?
Yeah, I think we do, but also you have to acknowledge that in 2016 you can argue the rights and the wrongs of the vote, but we were given the vote, and ultimately democracy prevailed. You know, whether you like the result or not.
Democracy prevailed in Nazi Germany, mate. I'm allowed to think that was a...
Come on, we're not in Nazi Germany. We have freedom of speech.
No, the phrase democracy prevailed, focusing exclusively on that as an unalloyed good, is clearly not true. People voted for things that have not happened, which many of us explained would never happen, but they, in good faith and through no fault of their own, believed that they might. So how do we heal?
Well, we heal by hopefully people like yourself, the media generally, accepting that it's not perfect. I actually got it out. I was fortunate enough to go to hustings that were run by David Cameron and Michael Gove, so I actually got to listen to both sides of the argument. And we all accept that they weren't completely truthful, and we all accept there was a degree of arrogance.
No. I'm sorry. I appreciate you're still sort of in the third state of grief, but
no, I'm not in grief, actually.
Double the negative impact of the pandemic. It's not going perfectly. According to the sums, the people that do the sums that the entire budget is built on, the long-term negative impact is going to be twice as bad as the worst pandemic the world has seen in living memory. So it's not, some of this went well and some of it went badly. If you want to heal, mate, you've got to start telling the truth.
I agree completely.
So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how badly is it going compared to how well you thought it would go when you voted for it?
Well, to be honest, I thought it would be like a supertanker. You turn the wheel and it would take 5 to 8 years to turn the corner to go on a new course.
So how do you feel about the fact that it's sinking?
I don't think it's sinking.
So you're still in denial. How can we heal if you're still in denial?
I think you're making perceptions.
No, I'm going by the OBR forecast that the entire budget is built on. I've explained this at some length already today, Carl.
I listen. I also work in finance, so I think you have to give it an opportunity to work. Yes,
they've said it's been given an opportunity to work, and the long-term negative impact will be twice as bad as COVID.
I think, the problem is only history will judge, won't it?
Yes.
So 5 years' time.
So you're thinking, well, don't pay too much attention to what the OBR are saying, in which case, why do we have a budget built upon the OBR?
Indeed, but equally...
Now, what do you mean, indeed? It's a question. Why do we have a budget built upon OBR forecasts if there's no point trusting OBR forecasts, Carl?
Because some of the budget is smoke and mirrors, as we all know.
Oh, OK, right. But your vote for Brexit was clear-eyed and clever.
I never said it was... I was given a choice.
So, let's go back to the question of healing, then. What does healing look like while people like you are still talking twaddle?
Well, this is healing coming over the radio, isn't it? You'll say I'm talking twaddle, but I respect your view. You should respect my view.
I don't respect your view because it's been proved wrong. You thought Brexit would improve my country. It's making everything worse. What's to respect in that, Carl?
But equally, I'm still being polite to you, not the other way around.
You have very little choice but to be polite. Tell me what I should respect about the view that you had that Brexit would improve my country and my life.
You accept that we were given...
No, respect. What should I respect about that view?
That you should respect that I went into a booth and followed my democratic right to vote.
What should I respect about your view that my life and my country would be improved?
Look, at the time of the vote... Well, the problem is we're going back over old ground, aren't we?
No, we're not. This is a brand new question. I've never spoken to you. What should I respect about your view that my country and my life would be improved? Because I'd love to heal. So what should I respect about that view?
That given the time and given the information we were provided, and the key was we were provided...
No, I had the same information as you, mate, and I knew this was going to happen, so that doesn't fly. What should I respect about your view that my country and my life and my children's future would be improved by the thing you voted for?
Okay, well, first and foremost, you've obviously had the brilliance of foresight that the rest of us didn't.
No, mate, I just had my eyes open. What should I respect about your view that this would be good for me, for my country, my future and my children? Just give me one thing I should respect about that view, Carl.
Well, as you said, we're going over old ground, aren't we?
No, we can't go over old ground until we've been on it once. You haven't given me one thing that I should respect, and I'm going to give you one more go.
Okay, one more go. You should respect that I was given a democratic vote, and I followed
That's not your view. The view that you had that my country would be improved, that my life would be enhanced, that the economy would be benefiting, and my children's future would be better. That was your view. You want me to respect it. I'm happy to if you give me one tiny scintilla of a reason why I should.
Okay. My view at the time, in the short term, I know we'd go through some short-term pain, which we're currently doing.
No, we're going through double the negative impact of COVID for the rest of our lives. So what should I respect about your view?
But COVID is a separate issue to... COVID is a separate
What should I
issue.
respect about your view, Carl? Give me one thing that I should respect about your view that has been proved horribly and spectacularly wrong.
That I was prepared to take a long-term view on the outcome of this country.
Yes, so have the
and for your
OBR,
family,
mate.
for my
4%
family.
damage to GDP. That's the OBR's long-term view. I'm interested in your view that you demand I respect. I want one reason why I should respect it.
The very fact that we're on the radio having this conversation, that we can listen to each other, and we may finish this conversation.
No, that's got nothing to do with the view you had in 2016. So just give me one reason to respect it, because I would genuinely love to. I would find it helpful and healing.
Okay. Would you like to know why I voted out?
No, I want to know what it was about your view that my life would get better, my country would be improved, and Brexit would be good for Britain that I should today respect.
Okay. That actually we have our own sovereign parliament.
There we
can do
go.
our
Oh,
own
no, you got
sovereign
me
laws.
there. That's me done. Sovereignty. What is the point? It's the biggest elephant in the room, hopefully, that we'll ever see in our lifetimes. It's twice the size of the negative impacts of COVID, at least. But what's the point of talking about it? If you heard the last caller from Norwich, you'll understand Keir Starmer's position on this. What is the point of talking about it? We need to heal, but not if it involves admitting that we caused the wounds that need to heal. You have to be respectful of people who led us into this mess without actually pointing out that they led us into this mess. It's insane. But I understand Keir Starmer's position better now than I did before Carl rang in. What's the point of Keir Starmer doing what I do? What's the point of Keir Starmer insisting that people own up to their own actions, take responsibility for what they've done to the country? What does he possibly achieve by that? He just annoys an awful lot of people who still don't really want to admit to themselves, never mind to anybody else, that they got mugged, that they got conned. The most respectful thing you can do to a fellow human being is give them the time and the space to explain themselves. The most respectful thing you can do is give them credit that you believe they will be able to articulate the foundation stones of their thoughts. The most respectful thing you can do in the context of debate is to give people the space to explain themselves, to presume that if they did something, they can tell you why. So, if you want me to respect your view that Brexit would be good, now we know it won't be, why should I respect your view? Why? But underpinning this entire conversation, what's the point? What's the point of talking to people like Carl? What's the point of spending 5 minutes pushing that point of everything that you thought was going to happen hasn't happened? What have you got out of it? And they end up saying sovereignty, a word that never appeared in public discourse before the actual referendum. The mother of all fig leaves. Meaningless, but also emblematic of the desperation with which people now scrabble around to something that they can pretend they actually voted for. 10:40 is the time. I won't do What's the Point every day, but I'm quite enjoying it today. Melody's in Richmond. Melody, what do you reckon?
Hey, James.
Hello.
It's like a new game, isn't it? What the point?
Shh, we're not talking about new games until 12 noon today. Thank you very much, Melody. Please carry on.
Oh, dear. I don't know. I feel like I'm going a little bit crazy here, James. I feel like we're going into an echo chamber, and I'm trying to work out
Did you not hear Carl? I don't think Carl was an echo chamber, Melody.
Carl.
Yes.
I don't think Carl. I don't know what was going on with Carl there, but this is the whole reason. This is the point, James, because I guess it's like, I can only compare it to if you leave a really bad relationship and you're heartbroken.
Yeah.
You don't want to remember the bad bits. You love them, and all the reasons why it should work, and you're crying and crying and crying, and it's only with hindsight that you realise maybe it wasn't such a good idea, but you might need talking to. You might need people to show you that. And it is just when you're ready to accept it. And I don't know, at the moment people are drinking the Kool-Aid.
Are they though, really? I mean, it's
I don't know.
I mean, even if they are drinking the Kool-Aid, today the OBR describes the long-term impacts of Brexit as being twice as bad as the long-term impacts of what Kool-Aid gets you past that?
I know, you can't get past it, and I find it, I feel like I'm going insane just by the fact that people are not getting it.
So what's the point in pointing it out then? And this is both a personal, a political and a professional question. What is the point of doing it? It's that you know already, and the people that don't know are going to deny it.
Well, the point is that you have to keep trying, because if you don't stand up for what's factually correct and what's right and what's good, then nothing can change. And I don't have much hope at the moment, trust me.
But here's the thing. You know my favourite analogy, of course, is the tale of the Emperor's New Clothes. You know that in the tale of the Emperor's New Clothes, the dodgy tailors got chased out of town eventually, right? They were hounded. They were hounded out of the empire. In Brexit Britain, the dodgy tailors replaced the Emperor.
I know, it's shocking.
They're in charge now. The fellas that flogged the suit that didn't exist are in Downing Street. So what's the point in continuing to shout about the fact that there was never any suit in the first place?
Well, I guess, eventually, and I don't know what it will take. I mean, I look at Insulate Britain going themselves to the road, and I'm like, why are we not going ourselves to the road about this as well? Because, this is shocking. Like, if we, is it?
I don't know. Well, I think my view will always be that we've got a gaslighting, grooming media that persuades people to get very cross about a theoretical ambulance that might not be able to get to a hospital, and probably today hasn't even mentioned the fact that somebody tragically died in the back of an ambulance yesterday because they couldn't get into an overcrowded A&E department. It's actually the thing they pretend that they're getting cross about in theory is happening in a reality as a consequence of political decisions. But hey ho, look over there. There's a footballer who's not kneeling or is kneeling. I can't keep up. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And a John Lewis advert as well today. You can get cross about that if you want, Melody.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that was, oh my gosh, the worst thing in the world, clearly.
Come on, man. 4% GDP hit for the foreseeable future. Do me a favour, as if that matters. Look, over there, a rabbit. But the thing is, Melody, I don't come away from your call or from Carl's convinced that there is much point in continuing to point at this. And I'm going to run with that analogy. In the tale of the Emperor's New Clothes, the dodgy tailors got hounded out of town when the scale of their con was finally revealed. In Brexit Britain, they replaced the Emperor. 0345 6060 973. Ross is in Islington. Ross, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. I think I think it does come down to the media and the gaslighting. But I think also as a nation and possibly as a species, we're very bad at mea culpa.
Yeah.
We're not good at accepting that we are responsible for a decision that's been made if it goes wrong. And I think the only time we will accept it is when it's, very clearly put in front of us that we were misled.
But how does it get any clearer than this? How does it get clearer than today? How does it get clearer than shortages? How does it get clearer than labour, businesses closing because they haven't got the bodies that people voted to get rid of?
There has to be a complete change in the way the media reports.
Well, that ain't going to happen. So what's the point? What's the point of being the boy in the crowd pointing at the naked emperor when the tailors that flogged him the non-existent suit have taken over the entire country?
So we can say, I told you so. But
well, I can't do that. It costs me £10 a time.
Yeah. I don't know. But I think what I was thinking about as a sort of analogy was the Iraq War and how, I think when when that originally came up, I think a lot of people kind of supported why we were going in there and what the basis for it was, and then it became clear that the dossier of information was incorrect and was inaccurate.
Yes.
And that gave people a reason to say, oh, okay, well, I was in favour of it, but I'm not now because look, we were misled. And I think that's what as a nation, we're very bad at saying, given all the reasons you're giving and that a minority of the media give, The Guardian, for example, then, people can look at that. They'll see the headlines. I wouldn't imagine that most Brexit voters listen to your show or
you'd be
buy The
surprised.
Guardian.
There must be 1.33 million people. They can't all be Remainers.
Well, who knows? But they're not going to look at that information, factual as it is. And
today it will pass them by. So they might have been listening to a different radio station or a different radio program or reading the website or the newspaper, and they're just not clocking. Even if they hear it, this bit from the OBR, it's going to be twice as bad as COVID. It just doesn't. That's what I mean by the elephant in the room.
Yeah, but tomorrow's right-wing press and the government will say, no, you don't want to listen to that. You want to listen to my reason for why.
Look into my eyes. Look into my eyes.
Problem. Exactly, and they'll buy that excuse because it validates their original opinion and their original vote. And that's the problem. And I don't see how we get around that until the likes of, until the right-wing press are saying, actually, we were misled. This
Which they could,
was wrong.
As soon as they think there'll be more money in rejecting what they championed 6 years ago, as soon as they think that 5 years ago, as soon as they think there'll be, or as soon as Rupert decides that that's the direction of traffic he wants to follow now, they'll all be falling in behind him like ducklings behind a mother duck. But I don't think that day is going to dawn anytime soon. And that's Only after watching 2 episodes of the latest series of Succession. We all need to heal, but the people that cause the wounds don't want us to mention that they caused the wounds. We all need to respect the views of other people, even if those views have been shown to be completely and categorically wrong, and we all need to work together to fix the damage that we won't admit exists. That is Brexit Britain in a nutshell. Rarely has it been clearer than it is today, when Rishi Sunak does a lap of honour after a budget built on OBR forecasts, without mentioning that the OBR also forecasts that Brexit will do twice as much damage to our economy than the pandemic. And for me, at least, the question of why keep the fires burning, why keep fighting, was always built upon the fear of what would happen if the liars were left in charge and got to fight another day. We've seen what happens. We've seen what happens. We've seen them preside over a catastrophic response to COVID. And of course, the tighter your Brexit scarf is tied around your neck, the more furiously you will currently be insisting that they've done a bang-up job on Brexit, and it's just a little bit of bad luck that we remain every day in the top 2 in the world for new cases. You open up your Brexit-supporting newspaper and you'll read about how we've passed the peak, everything's looking hunky-dory, everything's going to be great. Let's just not mention the fact that we're still recording way more new cases than pretty much every comparable country in the world. No, and we haven't even touched on deaths. I don't even mention the deaths anymore, which is a terrible, terrible indictment of my personality in a way. It's genuine messenger message territory. No one else is mentioning it. Why should I always have to be the one that delivers the uncomfortable truths? But my God, if you'd lost a loved one in the last couple of weeks, it must feel like they never existed, given the amount of attention it draws from the media. 10:52 is the time. So what is the point? What is the point of continuing to point out the reality of Brexit while half of the country is committed to denying the reality of Brexit, or at least pretending that their vote for it had nothing to do with it? Robert's in Stratford-upon-Avon, lovely part of the world. Robert, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
thank you for taking my call. First of all, I wanted to say the programme I think is brilliant, really, because the contributors generally, but also yourself, offer a way of seeing the world which involves compassion and fairness, concern for other people, which isn't reflected in the rest of the media. So I've been listening for about 6 months. So first of all, I appreciate what you're doing.
Well, thank you. You must be part of the rather splendid new listening figures that we've recorded over the last 6 months. So thank you, Robert, for your contribution. Now, where were we?
Yeah. What's the point? I worked in the health service for about 20 years. I did jobs like nursing, social work, health promotion, that sort of stuff. And then for the rest of my working life, I was teaching nurses and midwives and physiotherapists. And the reason, what is the point about this is that the consequences of Brexit and the escalating inequalities, it means that many children, particularly poor working class children, their health's going to be worse. Their life expectancy is going to be worse. Mortality and morbidity is going to be greater. And so this issue is really serious, and it's not going to go away. But there's something else, and I think there's something you've got wrong throughout this period when I've listened to you. And can I tell you what that is?
Of course you can.
What I'm thinking
in fact, I insist that you do, Robert. Go on.
Okay. Well, what I'm thinking is this: you talk about contempt for the con men and compassion for the conned. And I think some people have been conned. But in our country, what we've got to face up to is that many millions of people are attracted to this English nationalism, the xenophobia, the bit of racism, the casual racism, the authoritarianism. They're attracted to it. But there's something else that's part of this that is attractive for many millions of people. And it's something that the Birmingham cartoonist Steve Bell termed a long time ago. And he talked about the idea of being self-servitive. And the evidence suggests is that in this country, compared with other European countries, there are many millions of people who are individualistic. They think about themselves. And in those circumstances, what you may say rationally about Brexit, what we may say rationally about the 150,000 excess deaths from COVID, in a sense, doesn't matter. If you think about child poverty, which I referred to earlier, the Children's Society have estimated that this year there'll be 5 million kids in poverty. This is a social catastrophe, but it doesn't matter. If you think about Ireland, there's people in Ireland, there could be, after the protocol, there could be unrest, but they don't matter. You think about the fishing communities, they don't matter, because for many people in this country, this combination of old-fashioned nationalism and individualism, this self-servitive point of view, is really, really destructive. And they'll keep voting Tory.
But what
Sorry,
are they?
carry on.
That's a brilliant analysis, actually. I mean, a little bit bleak, mate. I thought I was a misery guts, but honestly, Robert, that's what's the win then? Because even if I take your bleak analysis of some of and I will, with your permission, I refuse to believe anybody's born like that. I do think they're turned into that by the forces that we discuss often on this programme. But what is the win now? So they pretended for years that they really cared passionately about the fishing fleets, for example, which have been shafted. They pretended for years that they really cared passionately about British farming, which has been shafted. They pretended for years that they really cared passionately about people at the bottom of the earning chain who have been shafted. They cared about businesses, which have been shafted. They voted... I don't know quite what they voted for, but all of the things they thought they were voting for, it's why the lad earlier eventually just had to go, sovereignty. What's the win now? How do they look up at the battlefield where they won? What do the spoils of victory look like, do you think? Because I don't think I know.
Well, I think that you're speaking rationally about this, and I think a lot of the voting for Brexit and also for the Conservative government is not entirely rational, is it?
So it's made them feel
xenophobia.
Better or feel good, and the reason perhaps why people like me take so much abuse from them is that with the slightest of tugs upon the tiniest of threads of their feelings, it all falls apart. They've got absolutely nothing to feel good about, but as long as they don't think too deeply about things, they can carry on feeling good, largely because people like you and me feel bad. And that's the nearest thing we're going to get to describing the spoils of war, even if we stayed here for 3 hours.
I may sound fatalistic, but I've actually got something positive to say to respond to
I think we need it.
In the 17 million people who voted for Brexit, some of those people were conned. They didn't know what was going on. There's a core of millions of people in favour of this. They like the authoritarianism, the nationalism, that sort of stuff. Maybe you're right. And they may not change. They may not change, particularly the evidence suggests with older people, older middle class and working class men in particular. But in our country, there are 65 million people. There are 45 million people in the electorate. So what I'm saying positively, this is an idea, and I'm not sure it's going to work, is that at the next general election, all the other parties, like Kimberley, the SNP, Labour, Liberal Democrats, the Greens, they have an electoral alliance, because this shift towards nationalism, towards xenophobia, towards selfishness, towards individualism, breaking the law and authoritarianism. This is dangerous stuff.
David Putnam, in his retirement speech from the House of Lords, touches on an awful lot of the subjects that you mentioned. Whether or not that becomes an escape route, what you describe, I do not know. But it involves Keir Starmer, in this instance, hoisting the banner, doesn't it? I mean, can he continue to ignore the elephant in the room for fear of upsetting however many people it is that aren't ready yet to admit that they were sold a massive pup? Can he? I don't know.
I think Keir Starmer and the Liberal Democrats and the Greens should focus on all those people in the electorate, the 45 million people who are not committed to these ideas. We should turn our focus away.
But what does he do about the B word? Because that is the focus of today's phone-in, is do we just forget, do we ignore that bit of the national pageant and sort of focus on... I don't know how you're going to answer this question, but you've only got 30 seconds to do it. What do we do politically? Do we just ignore it, not talk about it?
I don't know the answer to that.
No,
I
me
think
neither.
the rest of us have got to get together. We can have an electoral alliance, get the Tories out, proportional representation, and have a different kind of governance.
Yeah, I mean, again, as I think with an earlier caller, your ambition is I mean, both beautiful and big, but in the short term, question of how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this? I don't think any of us have come any closer to a clue. Luckily, Theo Ushwood is loitering outside the studio. No doubt he will bring his characteristic clarity and concision to bear upon the major issues of the moment after the very latest news. Summon the Ushwood, please. To what do we owe this pleasure, Theo Ushwood, LBC's political editor?
Let's start with Brexit versus COVID. Which is to blame, or which bears the greater responsibility for the current economic situation that we find ourselves in? Because I've been through the report, 251 pages, that was compiled by the Office for Budget Responsibility yesterday, setting out the economic forecast, where we are, where we're going, and where we could be potentially were it not for the pandemic and for Brexit. And there's a couple of lines I just wanted to read out to you. Now, it says, and this is talking about labour shortages, particularly in supply chains. We're talking about heavy goods vehicles drivers. Now, it says, in the UK, these supply bottlenecks have been exacerbated by changes in the migration and trading regimes following Brexit. Energy prices have soared, labour shortages have emerged in some occupations, and there have been blockages in the supply chains. Now, last week, in fact, I was speaking to Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, who has said that to blame. Yes, I was. Who said that to blame the shortages of lorry drivers on Brexit was a scratched record. The OBR's report also...
It's just shameful. Sorry.
The OBR's report also quotes the Centre for European Reform. Now, what it did was it created a Brexit doppelganger UK. So it created another version of the UK and took away the effects of Brexit, compared it to other nations. And it found that as a result of Brexit and changes leaving the single market and the customs union, that trade, but UK goods trade, fell by 15.8% as of August 2021. Now, Richard Hughes is the chairman.
So this is a theoretical universe in which the COVID happened, but the Brexit
didn't happen, and then compared UK in the European Union versus where we are now outside of the European Union. Richard Hughes is the chairman of the OBR. He's been in the job about a year. And of course, it's worth remembering that the OBR was set up by George Osborne, the former Chancellor, Conservative Chancellor, when he took up that post in May 2010. And of course, Mr. Hughes said that GDP had taken a 4% hit. Now, that was a bigger impact. Brexit had a bigger impact than COVID.
Since the referendum, we've assumed in our forecast that leaving the European Union is going to reduce our long-run potential output by about 4%. And in our most recent forecast, as I mentioned, we think that the effect of the pandemic is going to reduce that potential output by a further 2%. And so far, the data that we've seen on the impact of Brexit, especially taking into account the fact that the new trading arrangements came in January, is broadly consistent with that assumption that we had, which is that it would reduce our long-run GDP by around 4%. In the long term, it is the case that Brexit has a bigger impact than the pandemic over the long term.
Now, James, one of the arguments...
Hang on, do you want a pop quiz?
Go on.
Who do you think said, because you mentioned the supply chain there, who do you think said in a slightly sneering tone in 2016, according to some, leaving the customs union would see EU-bound exports backed up for weeks?
I don't know.
Have a guess. Do you want a clue?
Go on.
First name rhymes with Dishy.
Rishi Sunak.
Oh God, he's good. He's good, isn't he?
Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor. And of course, there has been arguments amongst those who supported leaving the European Union that we would see lower prices because we're outside. Go on,
Pop quiz. Who do you think said this in 2016? Outside the customs union, shoppers could buy the cheapest products available, saving us all real money.
Rishi Sunak?
God, he's good.
So Paul Johnson has been addressing, now he's the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which is a respected think tank which looks at all matters to do with tax and spending. And Paul Johnson has been setting out why, according to his analysis and the analysis at the IFS, those on middle incomes are going to be worse off.
On living standards, the Chancellor's presentation was upbeat. He claimed beforehand this was a budget to usher in a new age of optimism. But unfortunately for him and for us, the outlook for living standards doesn't match that upbeat tone. Over the next several years, a combination of tax increases and high inflation will mean very slow growth in living standards. A middle earner is likely to be worse off next year than this, as high rates of inflation and tax rises more than negate small average wage increases. And of course, that comes on top of a decade of historically feeble increases in real incomes.
Now, there are a lot of nervous glances on the Conservative benches and indeed comments afterwards, most of them off the record, about the fact that we now have the highest tax burden since the early 1950s, as Rishi Sunak admitted. Tory MPs don't like it. Rishi Sunak on LBC, amongst other places, was insisting this morning that he was very unhappy and uncomfortable about it. But Mr. Johnson was telling journalists, including myself, that actually that was a political choice, not something that had to happen because of the situation we're in.
This is the year when a Conservative Chancellor raised taxes by £40 billion or so, when the tax burden was put firmly on a path to exceed 6% of national income, and hence settle at a record sustained level, a full 2.7% of national income higher than it was in 2019, and when public spending was increased across the board to take the size of the state to a level not seen in normal times since those days of Geoffrey Howe. It's important to be clear, this is almost entirely a set of policy choices unrelated to the pandemic. What we've had is a Chancellor responding to the ever-increasing demands of an ageing population and a healthcare system on the one hand, and the increasingly dire plight of the likes of justice, social care and the prison system starved of funding for a decade.
Now, of course, it's worth remembering who was in charge during that decade, and this was a point made by Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor.
No, it's nothing to do with the Conservatives.
It was a Conservative government,
What?
of course. It was a Conservative government, of course. The first 5 years of that government was coalition with Liberal Democrats. So that's what. But you're having a conversation, James, about whether people might change their minds between rational thought of looking at the facts and then actually
feelings. Sovereignty is a feeling, really.
Feelings. And the point that Paul Johnson is making and others have been making is that actually people are going to be feeling worse off. The amount of money in their pockets, availability to spend money when they go to the shops for the small luxuries in life, are going to be eaten up by higher prices and because of inflation. And actually, there's, from the Conservative MPs I've spoken to, there's an actual real worry that, putting Brexit aside, putting the blame aside, that actually if people aren't feeling better off as a result of voting Conservative, that leaves the door open for Keir Starmer. The question is, of course, can Keir Starmer walk through it?
Kick it down, even. So the electorate then divides along the lines of Brexit voters, divide along the lines of people pretending that they wanted all along to be poorer and worse off, and people prepared to admit that this is categorically the polar opposite of what they were promised by people like Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and Digby Pudding Jones.
And so, but you raised the point quite correctly that it does potentially create that fissure right down the middle of those who voted for Brexit, and that's perhaps why.
So this is the first time you've brought it into. I know you're following on, as you always do, from expert input, but it does feel today as if the elephant in the room has trumped a bit, doesn't it?
Yes. What you're talking about, Brexit?
Yeah, but for me, it's an elephant in the room. Most of the analysis doesn't even pick up Rishi Sunak on the fact that he predicted the polar opposite of what is now happening.
But if you take it from Keir Starmer's approach, people don't like being told they're wrong.
No, exactly.
So if you don't tell people they're wrong, but you point to the fact about why they're worse off, and just
how do you do that? It's a really interesting flex, as the kids say, isn't it? So you somehow
don't tell them why they're wrong.
You pin all the consequences of Brexit on Boris Johnson without mentioning Brexit.
Don't talk about Brexit.
Just talk about Boris Johnson.
Just talk about why people are worse off. Yeah. So people cannot ignore the fact that they're worse off.
But you have to pin it on someone.
Yeah, of course you do.
You pin it on your political opponents, and you don't need to go into too much detail about why it's happening. You just have to say who is responsible.
Exactly.
Which is where, and you'll forgive me, I am something of an expert in this field, as Daddy Pig would say. I'm a bit of an expert. This is where the Boris is doing his best line kicks in, which you then just line up a couple of hundred forelock-tugging sycophants in the Parliamentary Conservative Party to go on Twitter saying Boris is doing his best, and anybody who says otherwise is a treacherous scumbag.
Yes, and also, of course, you have the line from Rishi Sunak is, I recognise it's difficult. I want to go to the space, the political space, where we are able to reduce taxes and to make you and to have that, in effect, that manoeuvrability to make you better off by the decisions that I make as Chancellor. But in order to do that, we need to go through this moment of pain. But from the Conservative MP's point of view, spending big doesn't enable you to do that. What they would like to see is actually a reduction in spending, public spending, 150 billion extra for public services, because they hold the view that actually that's the best way to eventually be able to cut taxes and spur on entrepreneurial growth. And of course, then that leads into trickle-down economics, that you end up with more money filtering its way down through the system to those on the lowest money.
Supposedly. Yeah. So the economic model that we've had in one way, shape or form since 1979. It is 11:13. Thank you, Theo. And I'm going to stay with this, actually. Theo sort of revivified the territory, don't you feel? He's sort of, brought a little bit more expert support for this question we've been asking all morning, is what are we going to do about the elephant in the room, guys? 0345 6060 973. And you know, I don't think I'm going to stop talking about it, but I've certainly talked about it a hell of a lot less over the last 12 months, even COVID permitting, than my first line instincts would go with. I genuinely, that idea of I'd rather not talk about it because it feels quite thankless. But I imagine that when you take that view, that's when all the really bad stuff happens. So the number you need, 0345 6060 973. How do you think we, and you could mean either just you and me, the two of us, you could mean this radio programme, of which you are an integral part, or you could mean this country and or this media. How should we talk about the consequences, the impact of Brexit, given that so many people still don't want to hear it? And I wouldn't say I have sympathy quite with that position, but it's probably the best word I can think of. Until you start telling me that I have to respect your view when your view was that none of this stuff would happen. Now, I can't respect that view. That's insane. That's like standing in a puddle and telling me that I should respect your view that you're bone dry. I can't. It wouldn't be fair on you. It would be disrespectful to respect your view that you're bone dry when you're soaking wet, because, I mean, it's topsy-turvy. I'll come to Josh in Chiswick first after the next break. But after Josh, it could be you. What are we going to do? 0345 6060 973. And I mean, what could we can move Keir Starmer into the picture a bit as well, because I don't envy his position. Gary Burton, who is becoming one of my go-to political commentators, he points out that it insulates Boris Johnson, Brexit, and yet it shackles Keir Starmer. And in a way, he's right. It's that scarf around your neck. If you voted for it and him, there's no way you can really acknowledge the reality of what's actually happening without feeling a bit bad or feeling a bit silly or feeling, even worse, a little bit conned. Whereas Keir Starmer can't describe the reality of it without telling you that you've been conned. I mean, and that's, in a tiny, tiny way, that's my dilemma on this programme. Although I think over the years I've established a degree of comfort with telling you that you've been conned. How are we going to do this moving forward? The evidence becomes insurmountable, but, of course, the willingness to admit that is, in many ways, emotionally more important than the scale of the evidence. I do not want to talk about this, and if I do want to talk about it, then I want you to respect me for the decision I made in 2016, which is an interesting and, I suppose, understandable impulse, but it is also utterly bonkers. Because if you held a view, for example, that the earth was flat, or that Bill Gates was responsible for injecting us with secret microchips hidden in vaccines designed to bring about a one-world government, and you demanded that I respected your view, you would fully expect me to laugh in your face. So why, if your view in 2016 was the same as Rishi Sunak's, or Michael Gove's, or Boris Johnson's, or Andrea Leadsam's, or Nadine Dorries, and now you've been shown by events to have been completely wrong, why the heck should I respect your view? I'll respect the idea that you voted for a very bad thing in good faith, but that respect is contingent upon you acknowledging that it was a very bad thing that you did. So I can't respect your vote for something stupid. It's why this reach for the democratic result or the democratic mandate is ridiculous. Democracies are only as strong as the information that the electorate uses to cast its vote. Now that is, one of the great truths of our time, of all times. You could get a vote. If you'd only ever been told, for example, that the moon was made of cheese, you could get an overwhelming majority of people to vote for the belief that the moon is made of cheese, but the moon would still be made of moon. For all your talk of democratic mandates and ignoring the will of the people and counting the votes, the moon would still be made of moon. It doesn't matter how many people vote to state or for the belief that the moon is made of cheese, it will still be made of moon. And that is the problem, I think, that some people are still struggling fully to understand. You voted for less red tape, you got more. You voted for a better economy, it got worse. You voted to improve fishing, it got shafted. You voted to help farmers, they got shafted. You voted to, you just carry on forever. You voted for sewage being pumped into our waterways, did you? Of course you didn't. So why pretend either that you did or that I should respect the views that you held when you cast a vote that has led to all or most of these terrible things happening to all of us? But how do we do it? How do we do it? For example, if you're on your last legs, if you're thinking, he drives me potty, he's got so many listeners now, I don't think he needs me anymore. I'm going to do myself a favour and stop listening because I feel so silly when he rubs my face in what I did in 2016. What keeps you on board? How do we talk about this in a way that you could still, quotes, enjoy, end quotes? Because I don't know anymore. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Josh is in Chiswick. Josh, what would you like to say?
Well, thanks, James. Just to say, quite a lot of what I was going to say has been covered, which is sort of about the precarious position that Keir Starmer and Labour are in at the moment. I mean, the issue is, you're quite right, we do have a very right-wing media in this country, but if the official opposition is not banging that drum, then the BBC are not going to cover it.
But what drum are we talking about? Can we to take Theo's... And it wasn't a suggestion, he doesn't do opinion, but it was an analysis. The idea that the drum they should be banging would involve describing, detailing and dishing out the consequences without necessarily bringing the B word into it.
And I think that probably is the way to go, without wanting to make this sound like a total echo chamber, because I think
It's not, I disagree with you. It's the opposite of an echo chamber.
Well... True. I mean, but in the sense that we, when people can't get their grandparents or parents into a care home because there aren't enough staff, or it's too expensive to do so because
they can't. Okay, so this is how it works historically, and I think you sound a little bit younger than me, so forgive me if I sound patronising. You probably know all this already. So first of all, you blame immigrants, right? Now, arguably, they won't be able to do that anymore. Because they've got rid of so many.
It will be the unemployed next, probably.
I sense you may have listened to the programme before, Josh. So would that work? I can't get my mum into a care home. I blame the unemployed. Would that work?
I mean, it could, but I think in a combination of
kneeling footballers. I can't get my mother into a care home. It's because of all those footballers taking a knee on Saturday.
It's very true. I mean, if they just weren't, on one leg and worked in a care home, everything would be fine. But look, I mean, the situation is that, Labour is totally hamstrung at the moment because the northern areas which they lost were primarily pro-Brexit, is my back of a fag packet understanding of that situation. Obviously, you can blame a disastrous campaign by Corbyn as well for that. But Corbyn actually, by sitting on the fence on Brexit, you could argue potentially read that right in terms of losing Labour heartlands. But I think the situation is that, they're totally hamstrung because, Keir, I would like to believe, is a Remainer. He campaigned, vocally for a second referendum. But it's
technically, he's not a rejoiner. He can't campaign on rejoining, and remaining is now a redundant term. So I'd love to talk to him about this, actually, either on or off the record. What is the calculation? With more harm, we can talk about all of the consequences, all of the symptoms of the disease without mentioning the disease. It just doesn't seem logical, but we are not in logical times.
But we're not in logical times. And I think, if you look at, I would like to think, because when I looked at the Brexit offer, I was like, well, all we're voting for if you vote to leave is voting for economic uncertainty, right? That was the only solid thing I could see happening. And funnily enough, look, it's happened.
Yeah.
But the situation is I felt that the Brexit vote and the Brexit campaign did a good job of appealing to the heart rather than the head.
Well, here's one.
Right?
James, I never know whether these texts are for real or not. James, we voted for Brexit at any cost, and any is in capital letters. So you're never going to reach them, however you dress it up, however much lipstick you put on the proverbial pig. You're never going to reach them because they would struggle to tell you what day it is. But this idea of the consequences, the costs becoming clear, the costs that you were told would never exist, you're now claiming you voted for them at any cost. That is the challenge. And I mean, that is a really interesting area of conversation. I take my medicine, Neil in Pinner, right? What a mess, and there's nothing we can do to make it better. Why didn't you do more, James? You knew what was going to happen. You were right on everything you said, and I know you said a lot, but outside of that, you didn't do enough. People would have listened to you. Well, for a start, they wouldn't. With the profile that the programme enjoys these days is considerably bigger than the profile it enjoyed back in 2016. And secondly, I was moonlighting for the BBC at the time, so in retrospect, very foolishly. I should have said no when Newsnight came calling and stayed here laying out the odds, but I tried to be a little bit more impartial in the run-up to the referendum on here because I was a little bit dazzled by getting to present Newsnight, which is a very, very big deal. When push came to shove and I had to make a choice between the two, Neil, I chose you. I chose LBC, and I have absolutely no regrets whatsoever about that. But it did mean that during that crucial period, the truths I was telling. I wasn't even spreading opinions, remember. I wasn't even publishing a rabidly anti-Brexit magazine in the way that Andrew Neil, who was allowed to work at the BBC, continued to publish a rabidly pro-Brexit magazine. That the nature of the British establishment is such that... I'll give you an example of how nuts it is. One of the hate sites yesterday published a picture of me at the Kebab Awards not wearing a mask. I'm going to run you through that again and see if you can spot the obvious madness that they obviously consider their own followers and readers to be too stupid to spot. I was sitting at the table at the Kebab Awards not wearing a mask. If anybody listening to this programme has ever eaten a kebab while wearing a mask, then I would like to see photographic evidence. So that's the point. Everything is skewed and backwards, Neil. So, yeah, I could have done more, but I don't think it would have made any difference. And Steve makes a point that actually quite a lot of callers more so texters and tweeters have made. He says, James, I voted to leave on the information they gave out. I made the wrong decision. Tell me what I can do to revert my decision. The government's in denial. They will never have a face-to-face with anyone that confronts the truth. Can you help me out? Thanks for that, Stevie, up in Fife. But I can't. And genuinely, today's programme, as with every programme we make together, is built upon sincere inquiry. I am probably going to carry on talking about this for the foreseeable future, but I'm not entirely sure how or how often. But equally, I wonder today what the point is, given that the opposition can't really capitalise upon it and the government will never admit it. And if you needed proof of that, today is the day that the proof becomes utterly irrefutable. Rishi Sunak building an entire budget upon economic forecasts and calculations conducted by a body that insists Brexit will be twice as bad for the economy than the pandemic. And if today is not the day upon which everybody puts their hands up and says, well, this hasn't gone entirely as planned. If we're really going to dig ourselves out of this hole, then the first thing we're going to have to do is take the spades off the people that dug it. That's not going to happen. So what's the point? The tailors, well, they weren't even tailors, were they? The con men responsible for the parable of the emperor's new clothes were drummed out of town. In Brexit Britain, they replaced the emperor. Michael's in Oxford. Michael, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I don't always agree with you, but I respect one thing about you, and that's your realistic views on the B word.
What about my sense of humour and my board game?
Yeah, but that's coming next.
All right, carry on.
And the fact that you didn't spear yourself with a skewer the other night without the mask. Anyway, I did not vote for Brexit, but I suffered the consequences by having to leave the UK for work. My line of work is not respected by this government and never has been. I'm in agriculture and horticulture.
Oh.
And so I had to leave. And now we're dealing with the details of the consequences.
Yes.
And I'm back in the UK today to discuss with government just how we can streamline some of the troubles that drivers who do not want to come to the UK anymore to bring flowers, to bring plants, because of the red tape that's become involved.
Red tape plus labour short. I see what you mean. So the red tape is a consequence. The shortage is a consequence of the red tape and costs.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
However, I'm not sure if you're a flower buyer or not, and you may have seen the prices of flowers gone up here. The UK only produces 14% of its flower needs.
Mm.
It is inevitable that those costs are going to rise dramatically. And I can tell you now, they're going to get much, much worse. So trying to make logic out of no logic, because everybody was conned who voted for Brexit.
Well, except the people who said it was worth it. You know. Well, I don't know whether they were conned or not, but the people who say it was worth it. So everything will be more expensive. Everything will be worse. Theoretically, because not everything will be. Some things will be hopefully stay about the same. Some things may even get better. But they will claim any negative you bring. So they'll pretend, if they're listening to you now, that who cares about flowers? Blooming metropolitan sniffy flower buying elite, and they'll ignore the fact that lots of other things, essentials, will go up in cost for exactly the same reasons. But yeah, everybody else.
But I'm saddened, James. I came to live in the UK in 1983, and life was wonderful, and things got better and better. And the consequences of me having to leave here was a very, very sad day for me.
To keep your business afloat, effectively.
To keep my business afloat. However,
Go on.
I am so happy that I've left.
Oh.
You cannot believe it.
All right.
Because I can trade so easily now, where I cannot trade with the UK.
I hear everything you're saying. I wonder if I could trouble you for an answer to the question of what we should do. Without sounding silly, it's all right for you. You got out. I don't want to get out. I
didn't want to.
No, I know you didn't. But actually, Brexit, I suppose, if I am honest, is good for my business in a very specific and limited way. Although I'd swap all of that in a heartbeat. For the national interest, but what do we do? You're back in the country for a while. You're not listening every day.
I do. I believe it or not, I've got the LB app.
I set that up. That was pathetic. I set that up like such a needy little loser.
I need your vote.
But you know what I mean. What do those of us who don't just acknowledge the size of the elephant in the room, those of us that knew? That we knew without any doubt whatsoever that the elephant was coming and that it was going to be in the room for as long as any of us are going to be alive. What do we do about the elephant?
Unfortunately, you're sitting with a rudderless opposition.
Yeah.
And if every single person who voted for another party tried to, at the next election, voted against the government, it still wouldn't happen because Rishi is going to dish out more tax relief by the
banks.
score.
The banks are getting attacked. The banks are getting tax relief, I think.
Of course.
Yeah.
And who's going to? And before the next election, it's going to be all rosy again for them.
We shall see. You haven't answered my question. What do I do? What do I do on the Great British Radio Show with regard to reporting the realities and the consequences of Brexit?
If I knew that, I'd be back here.
They'd be replacing me, doing my holiday cover. 11:42 is the time. Thank you, Michael. Mystery Hour on the way, of course, at 12, with some incredibly exciting news, which could change the face of your Christmas. In fact, probably will change the face of your Christmas. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with us, even as you quit the country. It means, of course, that you'll never be in receipt of a Radar diary. So that's 1.33 million plus Michael. Listening overseas, in fact, quite a lot of overseas listeners getting in touch today to insist that they be added to our record-breaking listening figures. I'll see what I can do. Andrew's in Hay-on-Wye. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Good morning, sir. Hope you're well.
I'm all right. What's on your mind?
Three parts, really, to your what's the point question. So I'll try and keep it brief because I know you've got exciting news at 12 o'clock.
No, apparently so.
The sort of first point really...
Hang on a minute, it's 17 minutes to 12. How brief are you thinking of keeping this?
I could be here for some time, but I know you'll cut me off at some point.
You and me both. We've got a break coming up, so I'll shut up and let you fill your boots.
No problem. I've been on before and spoke with you about I was a Brexit voter, only looked at one side of the menu, tuned in, and obviously if it hadn't been for the likes of yourself and this show, if there's no alternative offered or different opinion, I'd make the same mistake again. So anyone can make a mistake. It's sort of owning it and what you do after.
Absolutely.
But in terms of where do we go from here, how do we change it? From the calls this morning, when the Brexit vote went through, you had 48 melodies to 52 Carls.
Yeah.
So it's about, you don't have to make massive wins on this. I mean, if the listeners have gone up to 1.3 million, obviously people are starting to... Sorry, people are obviously starting to look for that rational response. Well,
to be fair, we haven't talked about it much in the last 18 months. So I love your reasoning because it's very flattering to me. But I don't know that Well, look, here's the thing: you're heading towards the suggestion that we agitate for another referendum. But who politically is going to do that? Because Keir Starmer can't.
But you always need the next bit to happen then. So like my last point was Boris is the face of Brexit. Boris drove it. Boris got the deal, the terrible deal, over the line. And at some point it will fall like a deck of cards, the way the British media goes. So I think the previous caller mentioned the Iraq war. So everybody was for the Iraq war until it came out that there were no weapons of mass destruction. Yes. It was an illegal war.
Not everybody, to be fair, but I take your point. I know what you mean.
Yeah, but rather than acknowledge that we went there by mistake or under false pretenses, the British media rebranded it from the Iraq war to the American-led invasion. So I genuinely believe at some point when Brexit, because we haven't even completed Brexit yet, it's only halfway done. We keep kicking that can down the road. Yeah. But I genuinely believe that when Brexit starts to bite, Boris won't want to be seen as the face of Brexit anymore, and they'll pin it on the Europeans. But then they'll have to rebrand what Brexit was. So I genuinely believe there'll be a rebranding.
We go back to the narrative of victimhood. We go now back to those nasty foreigners have done this to us. It has nothing to do with what we've done to ourselves.
To an extent. Yeah. But, it may not happen in the next 6 months to 12 months, but we do need a proper leader of the opposition. So it's not there. Like Miliband for 10 minutes yesterday in PMQs, Boris was blustering. He was on the back foot because Miliband was talking about what's coming up in the next 6 months. Whereas when Starmer tries to take Boris on, he's talking about things Boris has done, and then Boris, for some reason, Starmer can't land a glove on him. But
that's really, really interesting for a whole heap of reasons. Let's return to the conversation underway, although I have to tell you that the appetite for having this conversation is huge, which is a part of the answer, perhaps, to the question of what's the point in continuing these conversations. But in the terms of an end game, I don't know how interesting you find it, that Keir Starmer has come in for more criticism in a conversation about what we should do with regards to the Brexit elephant in the room than Boris Johnson has. I guess you bake in Boris Johnson's responsibility for the disaster, but Keir Starmer's tactics in responding to it being one of the main strands of the entire conversation. 11:54 is the time. Trevor is in Accrington. Trevor, what would you like to say?
Well, good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Basically, it's a little bit more on what the last caller was saying.
Yes.
I voted Remain because of probably all the reasons that I've listened to you talk about over the years since. My problem is the vote has so messed up the country. It's so fractured the country. I wonder, and it's really a question to you: can we do anything if we went back into the?
Well, I mean, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So you can't gather around that standard. You can't march under that banner. Pointing, I thought for.
I don't want to march under any banner. I'd love to see us less scratch. I just want what we can do. Whether you're doing a great job talking about it, and it always.
Oh, the phone line's gone. You could tell it was struggling a bit. I didn't even get to ask you about Rishi Sunak's confusing Burnley with Bury, which is very much in your neck of the woods. 11:55 is the time. We may get you back, but of course, Mystery Hour is almost upon us, and possibly the most significant Mystery Hour in the history of Mystery Hour. The most significant Mystery Hour of all the Mystery Hours, coming up later today with an event that I frankly have to almost check that it's not April Fool's Day to believe is actually true. So find out a little bit more about that in 5 minutes. Paul's in Dublin. Paul, what would you like to say?
James, great to talk to you. And, LBC is lucky to have you. Pity the mainstream media didn't have you throughout the whole Brexit thing, and we might have got a different result. But anyway, let's move on. And you don't have much time, so let me fly through. First thing...
It's like a red button. You're doing your own commentary. Carry on.
Okay. First thing, I'm in Dublin. And yesterday we got news that since Brexit, 20% of import-exports from Dublin to Britain have reduced since Brexit. But up to 40% of traffic from Ireland, Dublin, to mainstream Europe, France, etc. That's actually doubled. So, this is amazing for Ireland, actually, particularly the Republic. We've got problems in the north, of course, but in the Republic, because...
Actually, well, you say that. The problems in the north are historical problems that are being resurrected, but economically they're in quite a good position.
The whole thing is being used, the protocol
is precisely
used,
that,
Yeah. But anyway, what I was going to say was it's amazing for the Republic because it kind of is changing the relationship with Britain forever for the past 800 years, and which is a good thing because in essence that relationship has been one of the abuser and the abused, and we know which shoe fits. Sure. But going back to your point, hearing and experience, we can learn by hearing. And in that sense, the more enlightened, for want of a better word, they learn from hearing, from someone telling them something sensible. But others have to experience it. You see it with kids. You tell them, don't touch the fire, don't touch the fire, don't touch the fire. Then they go and touch the fire, and then they don't touch it after that because they burn themselves. So Britain is being burned by Brexit. It may still take some more time before the blisters to arrive and the pain to really be experienced. But once it is experienced to a sufficient degree, and it will be, the French, it was amazing this morning. The French have done something with the fishing. I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I heard one of the British ministers say, it's outrageous that France are not following international law.
Yes.
Really?
Yes, in a very limited and specific way were the words that jumped into your mind, weren't they?
Oh, exactly. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, the hypocrisy, the stench of hypocrisy is just unbelievable. And the people will eventually cop onto it. They will. I mean, British people are intelligent people. How can you be led like a bull with a nose ring by leaders who have no integrity, no honesty, or virtually no integrity, virtually no honesty, and in particular, no humility. Without humility, you cannot learn. Learning, you have to be humble to learn because you have to accept there's things you don't know. If you think you know everything, you can never learn. And that is what exudes from the exceptionalism of people, particularly like Boris Johnson, etc. So hearing and experience, that will have an impact. And in the meantime, please, somebody who has money, finance the most comprehensive polling of the British public. Give them at least 4 options. We keep the status quo with the European Union. We return to the European Union, or we have some nuances in between. We return to the single market. We return to the customs union, or return to both of those, or whatever. And let's see how those polls pan out. And you will see increasingly, as the pain and experience of Brexit it impacts on the British people, those polls will increasingly show that we should have some closer relationship with the EU. And at that point, then you have a second referendum and bingo, it's all sorted.
Well, I love it. I love your optimism. I love your clarity of thought, and I love your analysis, Paul. But now comes the but. We won't be able to rejoin on the terms that we were in before. That's just a complication, a wrinkle in your theory. But the key lesson there is actually patience, alongside the idea that all you keep doing is doing your job. You keep reporting what is happening to people, perhaps a little less of the rhetoric and a little less of the impassioned monologues and a little bit more of, oh, you're a lorry driver, what's going on? You're a haulier, what's going on? You're a fisherman, what's happening to you? Oh, I see that you're a farmer, a pig farmer perhaps, what's happening to you? You work here. Oh, you just go shopping, do you, on a regular basis? What's happening in that probably is how we do it, but just to perhaps identify one fly in the ointment of Paul's theory, the effort that was put into persuading you to vote for it will then be put into persuading you that it's nothing to do with the thing you voted for. And the only real mystery remaining as we head towards Mystery Hour is who will they scapegoat eventually? Will they have a crack at blaming what's happened after leaving the European Union on the European Union? Probably.